Welcome everyone. Welcome to webinar 3 of 3-part Dry Time Smart Moves webinar series. Tonight's webinar is supported through a collaboration between Holbrook Landcare Network and Murray LLS. And tonight the following webinar is designed to support farmers as we transition through the seasons. This time last year we ran a series called Crappy Seasons Convo, and the title is different but the aim is the same, an opportunity for farmers to get some insights and ask some questions. Online tonight we have some of the team from Murray Local Land Services, including Rebecca Stacey and Mark Corrigan. And our guest speaker is also Rob Inglis. First up tonight, Rebecca will give us an update from the farming forecaster before we hand over to Rob, the guest speaker. Tonight's webinar is recorded. If you have any questions or concerns, please get in touch and with myself or Kimberly Beer from Murray LLS. Just a bit of housekeeping. Question and answers, you can type them in the box, raise hand options, and also microphones will just be on mute, and we'll run till 8 p.m. Thank you.
Rob, we might just get you to stop sharing your screen and we'll switch over to Beck, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. Sharing, rightio.
Very good. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Nat and Steph. Can everyone see that on their screen? Yep. Good-o. All right. Yeah, so I'm Rebecca Stacey. I have to say I'm based in Deniliquin, so I have been looking at the Farming Forecaster site, but I haven't seen your paddocks over in the east recently. So, yeah, we'll just run through what Farming Forecaster's showing and a couple of things around fodder budgeting considerations before we lead into Rob. So Farming Forecaster's a free-to-access website. It's got soil moisture probes and a pasture model that sits alongside that. We've got different probes and weather stations across the region. The slide that's currently showing is just in the blue circles. There are probes and weather stations that are already online and have been on for over 12 months now. So if you look the furthest to the east is Mundaroo, then you've got Little Billabong and Mountain Creek are the three blue ones over in the furthest east. And they're showing rainfall measured for month to date. So from the 1st of November to the 17th, that's the rainfall that's been measured. So 32 mils at Mundaroo, down to 13 at Little Billabong. Through the different screens, you can, look at comparison to this time last year, depending on how much data's in there. And the grey circles that are showing they're new sites that we're waiting to have come live online. So there will be more information coming in the next couple of months. So if we have a look at the pasture model, so a couple of things to keep in mind. This is the one for Mundaroo. So just need to remember this is only modelling green herbage mass. It's not modelling what's dry in your paddock. So it's only green. So obviously if you haven't eaten your paddocks out, there will still be dry standing feed there as well. Or if your pasture's turning really quickly with the weather that we've had and the wind, this might be modelling green, but it might be turning fairly quickly as well. So you might have more dry standing feed than what this is modelling. So for Mundaroo at the moment, the black line is tracking across somewhere around that 2,200 kilos of dry matter per hectare. So again, just the green herbage that's out there. This one's based on a Phalaris submix with 500 kilo cows running on it at 17.5 DSE per hectare. And the shading in the background, just a quick refresher on that. So that is historic data, so pasture herbage mass information from the past 30 years that's been sitting in there. So in the pale green shaded section, that's where 50 to 90% of your years are spent in that area. So you're well below average at the moment for where you would be for this time of year. You're sort of tracking in that somewhere in that 25 to 50% of your years. And the plotted lines across there, so the blue is, based on the weather and the models that have been run. That's the 90th percentile. So, if you got really good rain now, you might kick up into that green territory. If we, drop down to the lowest 10% of models, to the 10th percentile down in the red, it's going to turn even faster. So currently at the moment, you're sort of plotting across in that, 2,000 kilos, and, just tracking across for the moment. The 50th percentile, so call it half, is the yellow line. So you might get across to, another week or so in November, and it might drop down from there. So then if we have a quick look at Little Billabong, so again, it's, it's below average, well below average, and probably looking to cut out earlier than it typically would. Again, this is green herbage, not including your dry stuff that's in the paddock, but it's tracking across at that sort of 1,500 kilos per hectare, and above what the 50th percentile of model was plotting. So you might be somewhere up in that 70th percentile of what the models were running. Again, cutting out sooner than you would normally be used to, well below average, but perhaps not yet a total disaster. We'll have a quick look at Mountain Creek. So if you remember the rainfall month to date slide that I showed, so Mountain Creek was back at 28 mils to date for the month. So this is probably where it's ticked up a little bit in this black line. So the black line is the actual, sorry, I should have mentioned that earlier. But it might have ticked up a little bit after some of that rainfall. And it's below average of where you'd be for this time of year, but you might get a bit more out of it going across now, before it drops away. So it wouldn't take much rain necessarily to boost you up a bit more, but potentially more likely that it's going to start tracking down, sort of maybe just below this yellow to green intersect here. So in the yellow section, again, the yellow shading is 25 to 50% of the years on record for, your herbage mass. And the lines indicate, your percentile indicator based on the conditions that are being experienced. So sitting somewhere around that 1,000 kilos of green dry matter per hectare, and based on a Phalaris sub-annuals mix. So just when you're thinking about this information, consider where your farm is relative to the locations of these, what type of, pasture mix you've got, what your season's been like relative to this, and, the type of enterprise you're running. It's all the information's there on the Farming Forecaster website. You just need to click into which site which site location you're wanting to look at, and you can have a look at any of them and just see what's going on. And then, use that to inform what might be relative to your place. So then if we have a quick discussion around what to consider when you're talking fodder budgets. So I've worked this on, fodder budgeting for what's in your paddocks, not a actual supplementary feed budget. So certainly happy to chat to people about that sort of thing offline, and one-to-one is probably easier than as a group over webinar, and Rob might also cover off on some of that as well. But when we're talking fodder budget considerations, and even for your supplementary feeding, considering what animals you've got, so their size, their class, pregnancy status, are we talking weaners? Are we talking twin-bearing ewes, pregnant cows, steers, just at maintenance, just having a think about what you've got, how many of them you've got, what you've got out in your paddock. So what's your herbage mass? What's the digestibility? So, your pasture height, density, have you got big gaps between tussocks, your green versus dead? So if you've got dry matter, more dry matter than green, what's that doing to your digestibility as well? In terms of the economics, how long can you afford to feed for? What stock will you feed? What can you sell? Just having a think about that sort of thing before you get too far down the decisions. And then it'll come into, if you need supplementary feed, what feed is available? Is there grain readily available? Is there hay readily available? What's the prices? What are you willing to pay for it? That sort of thing. So they're all, some of them are easy to answer in terms of what animals you've got, what class and pregnancy status they are. Go and have a look in your paddocks, do some pasture estimates, have a think about that sort of thing. You can certainly send away samples to get a good feed test indicator back if you need to. And then you need to start thinking about the economics of it all as well. So the next thing I've pulled out is just a couple of things so these, again, you can find these readily online through the ProGraze manual. But they're just good visuals in terms of, so this coloured chart on the left of the screen is just the digestibility of pastures, relative to their growth stage. So again, this will also be impacted by the pasture composition. So if you've got a heap of dry material versus green, but obviously in the early leafy green vegetative stage, that's when it's, really readily digestible and got good energy content. As you get down, the more stalks and seed heads and, flowering stage you get into, the more the digestibility drops off. The reason I'm mentioning this is that digestibility will also impact your stock intake, how much they can consume in the day, because they've got to spend time processing it, and then what that does to your fodder budgeting as well. The next one on the furthest right, this is more just to give you a bit of an idea in your mind, pasture height or average plant height relative to an indicative herbage mass of green kilos of dry matter per hectare. So I've just put a box around roughly the green herbage mass that was being modelled on Farming Forecaster, the amounts that we had, so somewhere in that 1,500 through to 2,000, maybe just over 2,000. And for that sort of thing, you're looking at somewhere around that roughly 4 through to 8 centimetres in pasture height for those herbage masses of green. So just what does that do to your stock, for your stock intake? Are they able to readily get a good mouthful each bite, or are they not getting much in at all with each bite? And also for that, considering, is that in isolated tussocks scattered around, or is it, fairly consistent and dense across the paddock? So it's all relevant information, but you've just got to think about it in the, sense of what your paddocks are looking like as well, and what you're trying to do. So the little visual at the bottom of the screen there is around, what roughly a mouthful of feed looks like for the, the type of pasture there. So if you've got big, tall tussocks, but they're spread out, this is based on roughly what 500 kilos per hectare looks like for that different sort of pasture composition, call it. So if you've got the big tall bits, they're able to really get a good mouthful in, what that does to their intake. If it's a bit shorter but it's dense, great, they're still able to get a good amount. They spend a bit more time grazing to get it because they're not getting as much per mouthful. And then if you've got a bowling green type situation, it won't matter how much time they spend out there grazing, they physically can't consume the same volume because it's, they're not able to get good mouthfuls every time. So just things to think about when you're looking at your paddocks and what that does to your fodder budgeting, and considerations around, there's been a few questions come in around, is there enough there to get us through until the autumn break? So have a think about these sort of things relative to what your paddocks are looking like. If we don't get rain, or if you don't get more rain, what that's going to do to your grass growth, and also, digestibility as it dries off, but also how much your stock can actually get. And then finally, I've mentioned digestibility a bit. This is probably not the easiest slide to read. My apologies, but I have just based it on 1,000 kilos of dry matter per hectare in the paddock at 60% digestible. So that's factoring in that you'll have some green, some dry throughout. You might still be sitting up at a slightly higher digestibility, but I've just taken that as an estimate. If we look at the very bottom line, so a 70 kilo ewe at fat score 3, in terms of intake, kilos per head per day, roughly at dry, looking at roughly 1.4 kilos per day. And then if we come across to a 700 kilo cow, again, 1,000 kilos of dry matter per hectare, 60% digestibility, dry or late pregnancy, looking at consuming roughly 7.1 kilos per day. So factoring that in when you go to do your fodder budgeting, how many animals you've got, what class they're in, what are they likely to be consuming per day. And then that'll help with your maths as well of what's in your paddock versus what's going to be consumed. Again, happy to talk people through it one-to-one over the phone or offline. And yeah, there's plenty of resources available, which we can also circulate after tonight. I'm not sure. I don't think I've got, this might just be rehashed, really, considerations from here. So your stocking rate, your livestock type, where are you at in terms of your peak nutritional demand? Have you got weaners? Have you got cows that you're looking to put back in calf, or ewes that you're looking to put in lamb? What feed have you got on hand, and what's your plan? So that's sort of what these sessions are about, is helping people consider what you're planning for and coming up with what your plan might be. But that's all from me. So I will hand over to Rob now. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. I'll find my slides. Good evening, everyone. Rob, while the slides are coming up, my name's Rob Inglis. I'm the Livestock Production Coordinator for Elders. I'm sitting here at home at Colin Gully. You probably see behind me, fairly dry. I'm just speaking to a fellow in West Australia before. It's 40 degrees over there, so we haven't got that mercifully, but yeah, it may be on its way. Can everyone see the slides? Yep, beautiful. So I'm going to whiz through my presentation, and I don't want to dwell on too much. So there's a fair few numbers and things here, so which I won't dwell on. But if anyone wants any more information, I'll send these slides to Steph or Rebecca, and you can get the information when you need it. But I'll start by saying I don't think in my lifetime, I won't say how old I am, but I was alive when St Kilda won their last premiership, so that gives you some idea. But I don't think in my lifetime that there's been a better time to be in the red meat industry. I spent some time with Simon Quilty recently, and yeah, he is very bullish, pardon the pun, and looks like blue skies for the next 4 or 5 years at least. So, yeah, as I said, I don't think there's a better time to be in the red meat industry. And if you're a breeder, particularly, I don't think there's been a better time to be a breeder. Females rule the world. So what I want to cover is just feed availability, and Rebecca's covered that pretty well, so we can skip that. Maximising ewe and cow recovery, I think that's really important. As I said, we need to look after the females. They're the most important species, or items. Maximum condition score on ewes would be about 0.5 per month based on the current digestibility, as Rebecca alluded to. We'll talk about energy requirements and fodder to buy or not to buy or to make. We've already done that. Rebecca's already touched on that. What I wanted to do is just give a quick feed budget. So this is based on Mountain Creek, and I apologise for the writing being so small, but if you can see if we assume the worst case scenario based on current stocking rates, where the Farming Forecast Society is, there's about 56 days of feed left at current stocking rates. So yeah, I'm being pessimistic, but I think it's good just to look at things objectively. Plan to budget for the worst and hope for the best, as they say. So have you weaned yet? I think as far as dry season strategy, early weaning to me is a bit of a no-brainer. There's two things here. A, it certainly takes the pressure off the females, which is really important. But secondly, I think it's there's no point maintaining weaners, be they sheep or cattle. It's pointless having a weaner treading water through the summer. Kilos are king at the moment. The heavier they are, the more they're worth, obviously. And if you've got a fat animal that's at sale weight, it's a profitable article, particularly the way the market's going at the moment. I know in Wagga today, feeder steers were up another 30 to 40 cents. I think, we're looking at probably north of $6 now for a feedlot type animal. So the sooner you can get to that feedlot weight, the better. And feeding for maintenance is wasting money and time. More importantly, as I said, we're looking at preserving the condition of the dams. I won't dwell on this too much. The number to focus on here is that by the time these animals, if we're talking British bred cattle, by the time they're about 160 kilos, only 38% of the energy that the cow is consuming is actually being transferred to the calf. So the milk that the calf is drinking, he's only extracting 38% of the net energy that the cow ate in that conversion process. So it's quite an inefficient way to feed a calf. Once they're over 160 kilos, they are, for all intents and purposes, a ruminant. And the sooner you get them onto hard feed, the cheaper it'll be, the faster you'll put on weight, and more importantly, you'll preserve the condition of those cows or ewes going into summer. And I'll sort of highlight that a bit later. As I said, I won't dwell on these numbers too much. You can read through them yourself in the presentation, but basically, feeding a calf through a lactating cow requires a significant, way much more energy than it does if you separate them. So a calf producing about 7 litres of milk has an ME requirement of about 155 megajoules per day, or if you want to put that in terms of pasture, in terms of good quality, 70% digestibility pasture, as Rebecca was alluding to, it's about 15.5 kilos of pasture per day to feed that calf through the cow and maintain the cow as well. Once they're separated, the maintenance requirement for a cow is about 60 megajoules for a typical British bred cow, and the calf requires about 36 megajoules. And at that intake, it'll be putting on a reasonable, 0.7 to a kilo per day. So how does this stack up? So 155, if you look at the 155 to produce milk to feed the calf through the cow, less the 96 megajoules that we're using once we separate them, we've got a saving of 59 megajoules or nearly 6 kilos of pasture per head per day once we separate those. So if we tease that out, 6 kilos by 100 cows, so looking at 100 cows is 590, or call it 600 kilograms of dry matter per day we're saving, or about 17.7 tonnes of pasture per month. If you want to work it out in terms of hay, which is about 89% dry matter, that's 20 tonnes of pasture hay, good quality pasture hay per month that you're tearing up if you don't wean those calves. So, yeah, the ultimate, I suppose, yeah, if you do, it's good practice once, not just in dry years, it's very good practice to do this every year, because we've found by doing it, the animals, those early weaners are more efficient. They're better behaved. I'm sure everyone is aware of that. And ultimately, you'll have more feed, which can be converted then into hay or silage, or you can run more females. So weaning early every year is a very profitable thing to do. I just threw this in, which sort of exacerbates everything. So this is for EBVs, Trans-Tasman EBVs for Angus cattle, as you can see. Bit hard to read. So, but basically what it's telling us is since breeding values were taken about 30 or 40 years ago, the Angus cow is about 20% more productive than it was back in 1990. So the question I raise is the animals are 20% more productive, and the studs have done a terrific job at genetically improving these animals, but are your pastures 20% more productive? Is our feed 20% better? I argue possibly not. So we've got a more productive animal, a better bred animal, but we're really still feeding it the same ration as it was getting 30 years ago. If we are going to wean early, I know there's a fear, and many people, I've asked this question a number of times, many people have put up their hand and said, well, I wean early, but I can't see any advantage. I haven't seen any improvement in weaning rates or weaning weights. I don't think I'm being sufficiently remunerated for my efforts. I get that. And that's all down to feed quality. So, yeah, the number of times we see people weaning early, doing the right thing, but feeding a poor quality ration, the weaners aren't growing, which is, as I said, expensive, because if they're not putting on weight, it's costing you valuable money just to maintain them. And secondly, it does compromise the animal in terms of its immune system. So you can see here, this is work done. This is the Weaning with Weaners program run by AWR, but you can see here, this is in sheep. 4 groups of weaners. The heaviest group weaned at nearly 24 kilograms with a growth rate of 63 grams per day, a mortality rate of 0.8. The second group weaned quite light at 18 kilos, had a really healthy growth rate of 160 grams per day. You can see the mortality rate 0. So what that's telling us, if you've got light weaners, if you have them on a good quality ration and they're growing at a good healthy rate, the mortality rate is very low. Conversely, weaners, lambs weaned at the requisite weight of 22 kilograms, but on a poor quality ration and they were losing weight, the mortality rate was 11%. So there's a clear message there. If you're going to wean early, you've got to have a good quality ration. When I talk good quality, I mean high in protein and energy dense, so that, as Rebecca alluded to before, digestibility is really important, particularly in young animals. Their rumens aren't big enough to produce enough microbial protein to support growth and the immune system and everything else. So we need to feed good quality feed that can provide some supplementary protein that the rumen can't necessarily produce during their fledgling years. I've taken this from the Feed on Offer Library, which is a good resource to look at, offered by AWR. So this is a typical sort of, I think it was a cocksfoot phalaris type pasture with a bit of clover in it. You can see here the digestibility of the green material is quite high at 70%. The dry stuff not so good, but the overall digestibility of the pasture is 68%. Crude protein is a little bit low at this point, so which is what we expect when these grasses start to go reproductive. While the energy isn't too bad, protein is one of the first nutrients to disappear. So that's why it's important that once those plants, particularly those perennial grasses, go reproductive, we really need to make sure we've got some supplementary protein. So this, again, from the Weaning with Weaners workshop or the Weaning with Weaners program, I'll just go back. So just keep in mind the digestibility of this pasture and how much energy or protein it's providing. So if we look at a typical, crossbred or merino weaner, where at the moment I'd suggest that most weaners should be around about maybe 25 kilograms. Certainly, a July August weaner would be circa 25 kilograms. You can see to have it growing at that nice healthy growth rate of 150 grams per day, we need 12.3 megajoules of energy. Okay, now that pasture that we looked at 1,500 kilograms, 70% digestibility is providing 14.1 megs of energy. So we've ticked the box in terms of energy. How are we going for protein? Again, to grow at 150 grams per day, we need 79 grams of metabolizable protein. That pasture, according to the figures based on this at 70% digestibility, is supposedly providing 144 grams of metabolizable protein. Now, if you remember back at the first slide when we looked at the pasture, the protein level was actually well below that. So I suspect that might be a bit of an overestimate of crude protein. However, if we use the figures and assume that there is some lucerne or some clover in the pasture that is providing some supplementary protein, it ticks the box there as well. So are we capitalising on this feed? So if we've got these weaners on this good quality feed, we've certainly got enough energy to grow at a healthy 150 grams per day, but we've actually got surplus protein according to our figures. So why can't we turn that surplus protein into more growth? Because at the moment we're wasting 50, 60 or 70 grams, 80 grams of crude protein or metabolizable protein that's not being converted into growth. So feeding barley or corn, if you've got corn, but something that's high in energy, not necessarily doesn't have to be high in protein, but feeding 0.5 kilogram of barley per head per day. Now, if I rate barley at 11.4 megajoules per kilogram, that's by 0.5, that should be, not 0.3, is 5 megajoules of energy per head per day. That extra 5 megajoules of energy, if we skip back, an extra 5 megajoules of energy gets us up here to 19, nearly 20 megajoules of energy, which would have us ticking along at 300 grams per day. And we've got enough protein. You can see the protein requirement is 121. We've got enough energy with the protein that's in the grass. If we supplement some energy, we can get those lambs humming along at about 300 grams a day. So what I'm trying to suggest here is, test your pasture, test your feed, work out what the limiting nutrient is. In the winter time, it's usually energy. By the time we reach late spring, it's more often than not it's protein. So in this case here, I'm assuming that we've got protein, we don't need energy. Once the digestibility drops, as Rebecca suggested, once we get there, in a few weeks' time, we're back to 68% or back to 55% digestibility, you can see protein will start to become the limiting nutrient. And that would swing us into using something like lupins or faba beans or something like that to make sure that we keep those growth rates at a really healthy rate. And as I said before, if it's going to be a tough season, the sooner we get these weaners fattened or to sale weight or whatever and off the property, that's more feed we're going to preserve for the female. So I'm a huge advocate for really pushing the barrow at this point and exploiting every morsel of energy or protein we can from the feed. So work out what your limiting nutrient is, provide that limiting nutrient, and really get those growth rates flying. Talking about ewe recovery now, or cow recovery, what I see invariably, and I've run about 50 lifetime ewe groups, is that people leave it too late to wean, and we finish up. We're trying to recover weight. We're trying to get conditioned back on ewes over summer on feed that's perhaps not quite as bad as this, but feed that's something like this. So you can see here, the digestibility is dropped down to 40%. So we're trying to get these ewes to recover on poor quality feed. Now, one would assume that during lactation, and we know this, it's a given that ewes and cows for that matter will lose about a condition score during lactation. So we need to get that condition back on as quickly as we can on good feed, on good quality feed, because it gets really difficult to do it in summer, as we can see here. So if we wait till the feed goes off, we really push ourselves into a corner. So you can see here in terms of weaners, to get that 150 grams of growth, that pasture now is only providing 5.3 megajoules of energy. So we're 7 megajoules of energy short, and certainly protein. You can see here we're down to 33. We're 40 grams short of protein as well. So in order to get those animals or get those weaners growing at the rate that we want, we'd be looking at 2.1 kilograms of barley. Sorry, that's the maintaining ewes. Beg your pardon, we're talking about ewes, not weaners. 300 grams of barley per head per day, providing 3.3 megajoules of energy. However, if we need the protein as well, we could feed faba beans at 0.5 kilogram a day, providing 6 megajoules of energy and another 72 grams of crude protein. So once the digestibility of the feed drops off and protein becomes a limiting nutrient, we're better switching from barley to faba beans because we get the best of both worlds. We get much more crude protein whilst not compromising energy. And at the moment, the last I heard, faba beans were trading at under $400. So my suggestion would be, if you can get on the phone and find someone who grows faba beans, I'd be stocking up and filling a silo. So ewe recovery, as I said, looking after our females is something that I think in these bad years we don't do well. And I think some of the poor lambing percentages last year that were reported particularly through Western Victoria, Central and Western Victoria and Western New South Wales, were a product of people not getting enough condition back on the ewes prior to joining. So the ewes were joined in light condition. And we know that the condition score at joining basically sets the fundamentals for both birth weight and lactation. So if they're in under 3 condition score at joining, we've already basically set the foundations for low birth weight and a compromised lactation. So we've got to have those ewes in 3.5, at least 3.5 condition score at joining to make sure we set up that good placental development to make sure we get good birth weights and good lactation. So for those that have done lifetime ewe, you'd be familiar with this. We know that, as I said, during lactation, they will lose at least half a condition score, probably more, but they only have to be 4.5 megajoules in deficit during lactation, and most ewes would be well in excess of 4.5 megajoules in deficit to lose half a condition score. So, as I said before, the most we can put on good quality pasture is about half a condition score a month. So we need, if they have lost a condition score during lactation, we need 2 months of pretty good quality pasture to get that condition back on them. In other words, we need 9 megajoules of surplus energy to retrieve that half a condition score that we've lost. So we need to double the energy intake. Basically, the energy that we've lost or the energy deficit needs to be doubled to retrieve that condition score. So how does this stack up in feed? So if we use this example here, we can see that the MEM or the maintenance requirement for a 60 kilogram ewe is about 10 megajoules. So we've already determined that we need 9 megajoules of surplus energy to put half a condition score on. So that 10 plus the 9 required to put condition score on is a total of 19 megajoules. The pasture intake is providing 6 megajoules of energy, so we have a deficit of 13 megs. That means we have to feed barley at 11.5 megs as fed at 1.1 kilograms per head per day in order to regain that half a condition score. So, as I said, the take-home message is don't leave it too late. Don't wait for the pasture to deteriorate too far because the supplementary feed bill will get very expensive. So the take-home message is feed early and feed less. Condition score, as I said, we know is absolutely fundamental. There's pretty much a linear relationship between condition score and conception rate. You can see here once we get to condition score 3.5, which is the desirable condition score, we can expect 40 to 50% of our ewes to get in twin, at a conception rate of probably 70 to 80%. Lots of twins, about 150 to 160% potential fetuses. So the better condition they are at joining, A, will conceive more fetuses, and B, we set the foundations for better lamb survival and better calf survival, in that matter, in cattle later on. This is all because of the, as I said, placental development, which occurs in the first 2 trimesters of pregnancy, basically. So up until day 90 is when the placenta develops. So once the rams are out, we need to make sure they're in 3.5 condition score. So if we get good placental development, we've got a good conduit, if you like, for nutrient transfer to the fetus. And we also, that placenta will also determine how much, the development of that placenta will also determine how much milk that ewe will produce later on. Now, one of the questions that was raised is water. And I know, I was down in central Victoria last week. That could be the Achilles heel of their operation down there, is a lot of the dams there hasn't been enough rain to provide enough runoff into dams. And water, not just quantity, but water quality could really stifle any chances they've got of recovering their stock numbers. So what we did find last year, particularly in Western Victoria, was people were actually pumping water out of dams into a header tank and then reticulating it to troughs because the dams were getting too rank around the edge. What was happening is the little bit of bacteria that was in the dams was basically the tanks were a perfect environment for bacterial growth, like a giant petri dish, really. So the water that was coming out of the dams, once it sat in a plastic tank for 2 or 3 weeks in hot weather, the water was actually becoming quite toxic. So what we had to do, or what many had to do down there, was actually start chlorinating their tanks and pipes. Now, those who are lucky enough to have bore water, lucky you, or river water, if my advice is, get it tested. You can see here the maximum tolerance levels, but really for weaners, we don't want to be anything above probably 2,000 parts per million. Grown sheep will tolerate a bit more, but for weaners, and particularly both species, we really don't want to be above 1,000 parts per million to get those animals, growing at the rates we require. Flow rate is probably the most important thing in containment areas. So those that are looking at containing stock, I wouldn't get too carried away with having, great big 500,000 litre troughs, because they have to be cleaned at least daily during summer. So smaller troughs with high flow rate are way more desirable than big troughs, because they're easy to clean, and B, you're not wasting as much water, because that water has to be changed quite regularly. So fodder, to buy or to make. So I did a little quick budget here. So when I talk, or when I advise people about buying fodder, I always suggest that you look at the cost per megajoule, particularly if you're feeding dry stock. If you're feeding dry cows or early pregnant cows, or early pregnant ewes, for all intents and purposes, is still a dry ewe up until about scanning. They don't need much protein. It's energy is the key. So buy your feed or cost your feed per megajoule. So I've looked at the cost of pasture, let's say $100 a tonne or 10 cents a kilogram, plus the cost of making and storing. So I'm calling hay maybe $200 a tonne to make. There's an opportunity cost there of probably $250 a tonne. Now, barley at the moment, from what I'm hearing, is coming off the header at around about $250. So let's assume by the time you paid a bit of freight and put it in the silo, it's 11 megajoules as fed. It's going to cost you about 2.5 to 3 cents per megajoule. So the break even for hay, which if you're making your own hay, assuming that cost per megajoule, your hay would need to be 9.3 megajoules per kilogram to justify making it. In other words, if you're making poor quality hay that's less than 9.3 kilograms, megajoules per kilogram, you're better off buying barley or buying hay for $250. So if you can make hay at greater than 9.3 megs, or buy barley or hay at greater than 10 megajoules, and there's some high quality hay and cereal out there at the moment, I'd suggest if you can buy hay for $270 to $300 per tonne, it's probably better than making it yourself. And I went out, as I said, I was in central Victoria the other day. There's quite a bit of good quality cereal hay sitting, particularly once you get west of Lockhart. So my advice would, if you can buy it, I'd buy it now out of the paddock rather than buying it out of the stack. It's probably the cheapest way to buy it. And the quality of the hay at the moment is very good. So finally, getting on to, feeding weaners. how much is it going to cost and what sort of ration do I need to look at? So any nutritionist worth his megajoules of energy should be able to do you up what's called a Pearson square. So I've constructed one here. So when we're feeding weaners, and I said before, protein is not important for dry animals, but it certainly is for weaners. We need to make sure they get a high quality, high protein diet. So I've just taken a typical ration. This is for cattle, straw, pellets, and some molliphos. So I've got a target protein here of 16%. So I've made a mixture of the straw, which I'm assuming is only about 5% crude protein. And whilst I'm talking about straw, I think there might be some good opportunities to buy some good quality straw this year because, yeah, as I said, north of here, the crops are quite good, and I suspect there'll be quite a bit of straw will be baled behind the headers, or header tailings will be baled. And if you can pick that up for, $100 or $150 a tonne, I think that'll be good buying because it does provide, whilst it's not good quality feed on its own, it does provide some nice bulking up, if you like, of a ration. So here I've looked at this. So we want 16% crude protein in our ration. So how much is that going to cost us? You can see that using the Pearson square, we've come up with a ration that's 17% straw, 78% pellets, a little bit of molliphos just to augment their protein intake. Our energy is fine. We're getting 73 megs of energy a day, which should have them ticking along at least 1.5 to 2 kilograms a day. They're eating 2.6% of their body weight. I'm assuming a 250 kilo weaner. That's going to cost us about $2.23 a day. So, as I said before, at $2.23 a day, if they're putting on a kilo a day at $5, that's better than backing. That's better than backing most racehorses, I would suggest. That's pretty good odds. Yeah, so just an example, this can be done. This is my little exercise at home. These are my July drop weaners. You can see I just used some C-section. I'm feeding them Faber beans at the moment. And that's last year's weaners sold in January. I'm a July lammer. I like to sell all my lambs in January. So yeah, I push them along. I practice what I preach. They're straight bred merinos. But yeah, if you feed them, they'll grow, no question. That's enough for me. If there's any questions, I'm happy to field them. Otherwise, as I said, I'll send this presentation onto the LLS and Holbrook Landcare, and they can forward it on to anyone who's interested. But if there's any questions now, I'm happy to answer them.
Thanks very much, Rob, for that great presentation. Now we're opening it up to any questions that anyone has. To send them through.
Rob, I'll kick off with a question. Anyone that's doing any feed testing, is there anything we should be looking for on feed tests? Anything we need to stay away from on feed tests? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, good question. Look, you need to read between the lines. So sometimes feed tests can be a bit deceiving because things like fat and nitrogen, for that matter, crude protein, can tilt or can inflate the ME number. So I strongly advise you to get a feed test done, but I'd be getting someone like a qualified nutritionist to have a look at it for you and make sure that you're getting value for money. And I'll use an example, vetch hay, for instance. Vetch hay can sometimes have very flattering feed test results, A, because it's high in protein, and B, because it does contain a bit of fat, which does inflate the ME number. So you need, as I said, read between the lines, look at the amount of soluble carbohydrate in the feed. That's a really good pointer to how good the feed is. And that's where some of the cereal hay this year, because we had a tight finish, particularly in some of the areas that didn't get the finishing rain, the carbohydrate levels in the hay are quite high, and that makes really sweet feed and very productive feed. So feed testing is a great idea, but make sure you get someone who knows what they're looking at so they can interpret it correctly for you.
Yep, thank you.
And if you are taking a feed test, sorry, I should have mentioned, make sure you get, a representative sample of the paddock, because it can, it's a bit like a fleece you get more variation in a paddock than you probably do between paddocks. So make sure you take 3 or 4 samples from, or 4 or 5 samples from 4 or 5 bales from different parts of the paddock, so you get a good average.
When you and I were on the phone the other day last week, you made a comment about bringing in, when feed's coming in, things like phosphorus and potassium are coming in as well, from the NPKS perspective. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yes, good point. So yeah, all cereals are very high, or generally very high in phosphorus. And dry feed is generally has adequate levels of phosphorus in it. But what it does lack, particularly cereal type or grass type pasture or cereal type pasture, is it lacks calcium. So we can finish up with a phosphorus and calcium imbalance. So if you are feeding particularly cereal hay or grassy type hay, you should be feeding a calcium supplement. Bearing in mind that ewes and cows at this time of the year need to build their calcium reserves up, either if they're lactating, obviously, if they're a lactating cow, they certainly need it, but ewes, they need to replace all that calcium that they drew down during lactation. So at this time of the year, when grass-dominant pastures are commonplace, or cereal hays and things are commonplace, make sure that you've got some sort of calcium supplementation in your system.
Thank you for that. If you do have questions, your microphones should be enabled. So if you do just want to pull yourself off mute, go right ahead. But if Mark Corrigan, if you're still on the line, I'm going to drop you in the deep end. Are you seeing anything from a vet perspective that people should be prepared for as we move into the summer months?
I think Rob's talk about the importance of growth rates and putting condition on at the moment due to the poor quality. So the better we can put conditioning to prevent the disease that's common. Generally, you should still be doing your worm tests, your basic husbandry things to just check what's going on with your flock. And definitely if the conditions does change, and the lambs, especially weaning lambs, aren't coming off mothers that aren't in good a condition as in the past, just big things on pink eye and pneumonias, those sort of things that we can run up if we run into a season that turns around. But yeah, just generally, I think if you're getting that growth rate going at the right rate, you're protecting your weaners and making sure that they're not susceptible to disease. It's just going hand in hand. Consider your water, as Rob has indicated, because there's some pretty low dams there, and definitely testing your water and having to plan for the lack of water this summer.
In terms of that worm and water testing, do you guys have kits available for people to come and pick up? I know we have a couple here at Holbrook Landcare, but if anyone's closer to you guys, is it just a matter of coming into the LLS office?
Yeah, so there's worm test kits that we supply from MAI. The water kits, we're just waiting on that because due to the lab testing that we normally get the water done isn't available anymore. I don't know whether, Beck, we've heard anything where we can send those water samples.
Not from a mass send-off perspective, but there is a lab in Benalla that does run the water testing and does livestock water quality and algae identification if you think you might have algae issues. So that's an option, and just speak to someone at the local office and we can help you sort it out.
Actually, I might butt in there as well, Steph. Yeah, talking about testing, it might be worth too, if you're buying particularly canola hay, is getting a nitrate test on it, because I know some of the canolas this year, they were certainly fed a lot of nitrogen in the winter, and if we had a tight finish, or where the finish was tight, the nitrate levels of some of the, particularly canola hay, seems to be worse, can be quite high, and that can be quite toxic, particularly if it's fed to hungry stock. So yeah, getting a nitrate test done on particularly canola hay might be prudent.
Yeah. I've actually had another thought. A lot of people around the area are AIing, bulls are starting to go out. This is probably for yourself, Rob, and Mark as well. In terms of looking after those cows that are early conception, what are your key points?
I think generally of what cows I've seen, generally on the whole, some of the condition in cows have actually been quite good this year. Even we've had sort of that. I think we're lucky in that we had a fairly good grass growing area in a short period, which enabled the condition on the cows. I mean, if cattle are poor now, they're never going to get in calf because we're moving towards the end of. If we're 4 weeks in, so we're at basically joining now. We're at a start of September calving, so we're starting to run out of time anyway. So hopefully they've had the feed there that they've got conditioned, but I think to try and catch up in that condition. I know whether Rob's had any experience with weaning. I've heard weaning very early is a possibility if you're really desperate to trigger a cycling response. If you could, if the calves were in good enough condition, if you needed to try and stop that process. But yeah, generally what I've seen, Rob might be able to comment on that.
Look, I think the take-home message from what I've observed, Mark, is don't change nutrition, particularly in AI programs, or any joining for that matter. What we've seen is some of these summer rain events, particularly, is during joining or post AI, the stock have been put on to loosen or reshot stubbles or something like that, where they get that sudden change of diet, sudden change in particularly nitrogen. And bearing in mind they are a ruminant, it takes at least 14 up to 21 days for that bug population to change. So often the mistake we see is during joining, people assume that you want to put them on the best feed possible. But yeah, that can sometimes lead to disaster. So if you are about to join or you've just joined, my advice is don't have a radical change in feed. Maintain the feed, and if anything, if you're in doubt, put them on slightly lower quality feed rather than higher quality feed post joining.
Mm-hmm. Cool. We're a couple of minutes off 8 o'clock. Happy to stay online for a little bit longer if anyone has any questions. But other than that, we might pull it up there. Thank you to those that have been online tonight. As we said earlier, this is the third of 3 webinars, so we're all wrapped up for this year. Yeah, lots of informative speakers as always. Hope you've all got something out of it. Tonight's webinar is recorded and it will be available on our YouTube in the next few days. Yeah, so thank you everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you.